The following program may contain coarse language, sexual content, violence, and mature themes, so if you're under 18, back away from the television. Not for you, buddy. Viewer discretion is advised.
Izuku had a large head start on his classmates as they fell to the ground. Behind him, he was jumping from tree to tree in order to reach the camp before the allotted time that the pussy cats gave them. He wasn't using his quirk in order to do this, as he had no idea if he could fly with his quirk active, but he was doing his best with his base strength alone. He was about 75 meters away from his class when he was swarmed with Pixie Bob's manifestations that grew out of the ground and attacked him. Using his quirk sparingly, he destroyed each and every one as he flew through the air ere he launched himself from a tree to defeat the constructs. As he was fighting, this allowed his classmates to catch up to him and watch as he fought each construct with precision as well as power. And they also may have entered the battle in order to keep him safe from any and all harm. Except Bakugo, that boy was more or less keeping his distance from the group. Within the next couple hours, Izuku and his classmates barring Bakugo and Todoroki were making their way near a lake that was next to them. Izuku noticed some water constructs coming towards them as he informed his classmates about them in time to get them to run away. Although that may have been to their detriment, since the constructs in the forest were now gaining on them, since they had little stamina ere their fight early on. All in all, Izuku would rate this first battle in his class without things going crazy in a city a 6/10 at best. It was near 5 p.m. now, and Izuku and the other proctors of the training for Class 1A and 1B were waiting for their class to arrive in the location. It wasn't until they heard the shrubbery move about that they looked and found Izuku sent flying out of the forest as a rage-filled Bakugo screamed at him, "Watch where the fuck you throw those balls of energy, you bastard!" The boy screamed at Izuku. It was really comical as Bakugo screamed that because his hair looked like a spoofed up afro and his entire body was black as can be. "Bakugo, refrain from attacking your classmates," Izuku said, staring at the boy. Bakugo scoed before walking but never noticed how his classmates were glowering at him from afar. "I swear we need to show him how it really means to be a hero before he places himself in prison for less abandon," Izuku said, as the pussycats nodded their heads. As the students walked over to Izuku, who was lying on the ground with swirls in his eyes, Izuku spoke up to his students who were present. "All right, during this trip you all will be training how to increase your abilities with your quirks. During this time frame you will all learn how to have survival training on the side of your quirk training. You will all be split up into different groups so that you can increase your power as well as investigation prowess before we head back 2 weeks. Although you will need to take a bath, you all stink," Izuku said, as everyone nodded their heads. Izuku was now awake again and saw the little boy next to Izuku's foot and went to go greet him. "Hey there, little guy, what's your name?" Izuku asked, as the boy lied his fist and tried to punch him in the scrotum. Izuku caught the boy's hand before it could crush his baby maker, and he asked the young man a question. "Why did you just try that?" he asked sternly. The boy, who couldn't have known this would happen, had just scoed before Izuku squeezed the boy's hand a little tighter as the boy looked up. "Little guy, you don't just attack someone who is trying to show you the common decency to introduce himself and honestly I can agree with why you wanted to do that. Izuku said, confusing the boy and everyone around. Oh yeah, how so, he asked, as Izuku leaned down and with dull eyes stared into the boy's own. Because I never had a hero save me from my problems. Izuku said, as he stood up. Not everyone is made out to be a hero, but some others just wish to help. I am one of those who just wish to help, but you can't get help if you just don't ask for it. Izuku said, as he walked As Izuku returned to his classmates, they all looked at him in concern since he never stuttered, and Mandalay had been to scold her nephew about the problems of attacking people he doesn't know. Izuku sat down in the warm waters of the hot springs as he tried to keep himself hidden from his class. He didn't wish for them to see his scars, but he wanted to make sure that Bakugo couldn't see them as well. Call it intuition, but he didn't want to have that kind of conversation when they are on break and needing to train their quirks to become better versions of themselves. Once everyone had the hot springs, he had managed to get out of there and clothe himself before heading outside, where the dinner for both classes were located. Sitting down between Tsuyu and Okako had been a slight challenge since they were literally taking most of the space with their tall frame. Izuku decided to just squeeze in. Once in between his girlfriends, he started to eat the food that the pussycats had made for everyone for their first night there. As he was eating, he noticed how the boy from earlier had made his way into the forest and thought nothing of it as he continued to eat his food. As soon as everyone had finished eating their food, Izuku came outside and told them that they would be getting up early in the morning in order to train as hard as possible in the morning. As everyone nodded to the problem that was their teacher's sleep issues, they headed inside to get some shut-eye before starting their first day of training. The next morning, Izuku woke up with a smile on his face as he left the building at the ass crack of dawn as he started his morning run. Running around the building on the track was good for him since it warmed him up for the morning cool winds moving about. It was here that Izuku ran into his teacher, who was stood outside waiting on the rest of his class. As the man sighed in slight anger. You all are supposed to get up right now. Why is it the one who gained his quirk in a festival of all things the one who woke up first? He grumbled to himself. Well, I have been quirkless most of my life. I had been used to waking up early in order to get to school early to avoid bullies, Izuku said, as the man looked at him. Well, far be it from me to retort to that. Just be sure to tell UA teachers if there is a problem with you and another student, especially if there is an altercation between you and him/her for bullying, Izuku said, as Izuku nodded. Still not going to tell him about bullying that Bakugo did in the early days of UA during the school year. It wasn't until about an hour later that the rest of his class arrived outside as the man looked at them all with disappointment. You all are an hour late. That won't work for rescue operations as well as hero patrols. Bakugo sees how much of a score you get this time throwing the ball, Izuku said, as Bakugo used his explosion to throw the ball. Although Izuku flinched slightly at the sound and proximity, he kept his slight fear of it hidden really well, as everyone saw the score had gone higher. What? Only a few meters? I thought it would have been higher, Bakugo screeched. Well, that is what this training for you all is going to be. About. You all will be learning how to increase your baseline abilities with your quirks and increase them to their utmost limit. Plus Ultra Style, but aside from that, Midoriya will be training with Tiger in order to increase his baseline strength as well as his strength when using his quirk. Since it works like increasing his base power as well as quirk power, they coincide with one another. Now get to training, Izuku said, as everyone ran to their selected areas. As the students ran to train their quirks, Izuku was seen doing combat training with Tiger as the man and boy were throwing punches and kicks at one another as Tiger increased Izuku's reaction time. Hours is what is how long the students were training today, as Izuku could be seen fighting Tiger still, with sweat coming down his brow as he focuses on his quirk in order to keep it on at all times. The hero had used his quirk Playa Body in order to dodge and block attacks that otherwise could have hit him, and he attacked with his quirk to increase Izuku's strength and speed. It was nearing the 5 o'clock time of evening when everyone came back, incredibly tired as well as needing rest from their training for their first day at the camp. Izuku walked over to the area where the class were making dinner. Izuku helped Bakugo make spicy curry as they were helping around the small kitchen outside. Within the next hour the dinner was made for everyone as they were eating silently in order to regain their stamina as well as their minds from their mental and physical workouts. Also, those that weren't capable of training as hard were placed in remedial lessons so that they could learn not to slack in training. As soon as dinner was done, the class had gone to the hot springs in order to rest their bodies from their training, as one of their classmates made a comment about how the girls were treasures that had yet to be seen. Izuku looked over and found Kaminari standing near the bamboo wall that protected the girls from them, as the boy was listening to the other side. Izuku sighed as he used his quirk in order to pull the boy back into the water in order to make sure the girls don't get surprised by him. "Oh, come on Midoriya, why did you stop me from looking?" he asked, as Izuku stared at him. "Because I have two girlfriends. I think they are my girlfriends at least, over there, and I don't want you to disturb them and the other girls," Izuku said, lowering his head into the water. "Like you could get a girlfriend, Deku. I bet they are only near you to get closer to me," the brash boy said, as the boys looked at him like he was crazy. "Well, from what I heard, the little man lost his V-card from Eureka earlier last week," Kaminari said, as Izuku blushed and slammed his face into the water. It wasn't much longer until the boys left the hot springs and headed to bed for the night, as Izuku stepped outside and into the living room of the Pussycat's cabin and saw Mandalay standing in the kitchen. "Hey Mandalay-san. See, can I ask you a cute question?" Izuku asked. "Sure thing, little kitten," Mandalay said, turning to look at him. "Is there a reason your nephew looks at my classmates with an angered look?" Izuku asked, as the woman smiled sadly at him. "Kota's parents were heroes, and they were killed by this class villain Muscular. They were fighting him in order to protect the civilians from harm. But they couldn't hold him forever, and he made Kota an orphan from their deaths. I'm sorry for him to see that his mother and father are dead, especially since the people celebrating their deaths are not a good thing to have a 6-year-old to hear at his age." I just hope he can get over his fury of heroes. Mandalay said, as Izuku looked at her and asked where he was. If he was going to save that little boy from himself, he might as well try and have him see that Izuku was in a similar situation. Although he hid it from his classmates all the time. Kota is on his classide area in the woods, just follow the small trail. And it would lead you to him. Please, just make sure that he returns safe and sound. I worry about him sometimes when he goes out there alone at night. Mandalay said, as Izuku nodded his head. Izuku would leave the cottage that night on a mission, bring Kota back home, and help him get over his trauma of his parents' death. Izuku had been training with Tiger all day. He had made sure that the hero could train him as long as Izuku had planned for himself to go. He was throwing air punch in order to manage to damage his fighting instructor so that he could do more damage with his hits. But every time the hero dodges from each attack, making Izuku have to think outside the box in order to land a hit on the man. Not to say that he wasn't being hit back by his opponent, but he was being damaged slightly by the hero, since whenever Izuku missed an attack he didn't use his quirk to lower the damage dealt to him. He wanted to increase his durability by taking hits without his quirk active as well as with it active at certain points so that he could keep himself in the fight. They were still going when the rest of the classes were making dinner for the group, when they all heard an explosion with green sparks come from where Izuku and Tiger were located. Running over to the area where the two were last seen, they came to an area where Izuku and Tiger stood across from one another, sweating heavily as they breathed heavily as well. That was a good hit. Managed to damage me while I was escaping. What are you going to name it? Tiger asked, panting as Izuku fell to one knee. I think that I will call it Super Explosive Wave. Izuku panted as he caught his breath before trying to stand back up. As he stood up on both of his feet, he stumbled as he fell to the ground in pain as one of the girls ran over to him. I guess it's now time for you to rest. You've increased your overall strength, speed, stamina, endurance, as well as defense, with your quirk both active and not. Get some rest and come back out. Later, me and the other pussycats have a surprise ready for you all when dinner is done, and you've all had your showers. Tiger said, limping away from the area to find Pixie Bob. It was a few minutes later that Izuku found himself between Okako and Tsuyu as the two girls were keeping him surrounded on both sides. He blushed from their close proximity, as he ate his dinner, and he didn't wish to disturb their eating. He noticed that Kota was walking into the forest as he remembered what he did the previous night as well as how he was hating on heroes for dying on the people they save. Hey, Okako, Tsu. Can I talk to Kota for a moment? Izuku asked, as both girls looked at him. Sure thing, Izuku-kun, you don't have to ask us, Okako said, as Tsu nodded her head in agreement. As Izuku stood up, he walked towards the trail that Kota had been walking on, and he had brought some dinner for the boy as well, since he didn't want the boy to miss out on some of Kaken's spicy dinner. Walking down the trail, he found that it leads to a small CLI that overlooked the summer camp that his class were training in. He finds Kota sitting on a small rock that was near the edge as he moved as close to the boy with the food in his hands. "Hey Kota," Izuku said, as the boy looked over at him. "What do you want?" he yelled at Izuku. "I'm just bringing you some dinner that Kaken made. I don't wish for you to be all alone here on the CLI," Izuku said, placing the food down. "Well, I'm not hungry," the boy said, angrily looking away before a loud grumbling sound came from his stomach. "Well, if you weren't hungry, I think your stomach is. But while you eat that, I want to ask you a question," Izuku said, sitting down next to the boy. "Well, what do you want?" the boy said, glaring at Izuku as the food was placed near him. As the boy was eating, Izuku sat down fully and stared at the sky with a small sad smile on his face as he began to breathe solely. "I wanted to know why you hate heroes so much. I know that you think heroes go out there to just die in battles against villains, but I want your true reason," Izuku said, as the boy just glared at the food. "My parents were the hero duo water hose. They were saving people when a villain showed up and killed them. They never cared for me because they tried to save the people around them and that got them killed. Then everyone was celebrating the fact that they died," the boy said, as angry tears came down his face. Izuku decided to take a risk and moved closer to the small boy and wiped his tears from his face as he gave the boy a small smile. "Well, I can't relate to you on that front in terms of heroic parents. But there is one thing that I can believe that heroes do more nowadays that is similar to why you hate them," Izuku said, as the boy looked at him angrily. "What could you know?" he called out. "Well, I was quirkless for a majority of my life. My quirk came in during the sports festival. I had always wanted a quirk and it never showed up when I was your age. And because of it, I was buelled relentlessly, told to kill myself by my peers almost daily. I was treated as less than human because of it," Izuku said, as he pulled his shirt up, revealing a massive handprint on his lower abdomen. "Well, didn't the heroes come save you?" the boy asked, as Izuku shook his head. "No. Even the heroes around me had thought that I was completely useless to the world around me, and some police even threatened to imprison me and my mother for being annoyances," Izuku said, as he gave the small boy a sad smile. "Well, what happened then?" the boy asked, now invested. "Well, nobody came to save me until I entered a hero school. All on my own strength and intelligence. I managed to get into UA without a quirk, but because of all the training I managed to get in before the sports festival. It didn't show up until my second event in the festival. It literally caused my body to explode with a massive amount of energy," Izuku said, showing the boy a scar that wasn't shown to his classmates on his upper torso. It was a massive gash on his upper torso and led up his neck towards his lower chin. "Why did your quirk do that to you?" he asked, as Izuku gave him a smile. "It was too much power for my body to handle at the moment of manifestation. I'm surprised that I wasn't bleeding from the manifestation of where it came from," Izuku said, as the boy looked at him. "Where did it start building up?" Kota asked. "It started in my hands before moving throughout my body up until it reached the upper torso and neck. It exploded because I was taking in deep breaths since I was low on stamina during the fight. Izuku explained. Standing up, Izuku imparted some wise words upon the boy as well as gave him some closure. I'm sure that water hose had thought about you in their final moments. And I am sure that they wanted everything in their power in order to return to you before dying. They loved you, Kota, they just couldn't get to you in time to tell you that before dying. Izuku said, walking away as the boy thought about the words that Izuku told him. Izuku arrived at the camp as they were about to start the event that the Pussycats had devised for them as a fun game to play. Izuku was set to go out all on his own since he was looking a bit melancholic. As Izuku was walking through the forest, he waited for the other students and teachers to come out and scare him like the event was supposed to go, but nothing happened. He followed the train all the way to an empty field as he saw that there was nobody around him to scare or tell him if he went the right direction. Unknown to him, some of his classmates had been knocked out by the gas that was in the surrounding area. Izuku walked around the empty field as he looked for his classmates. He eventually found a sleeping Tomoko as she was moaning slightly as he rubbed her shoulder to wake her up. That was when he heard the distinct sound of movement around him as his paranoia from his middle school had caused him to stand up and look at the surrounding area. Using his quirk to sense the aura as well as power of his opponent in the area surrounding him, he felt the auras and energy of his classmates and teachers on the ground seemingly low but sleeping. Releasing a sigh of relief, he guessed that they passed out from staying up too late, when he noticed another power coming towards him fast from the CLI that Kota was on. Looking in that direction, he found that there was a man with a cloak standing with a little boy in his hand holding him by the head. My name is Muscular, and the League of Villains sent me out to find and apprehend you. And this boy was on that CLI over there, and he will be used as a hostage in order to bring you in without any issues. Muscular said, as he smiled at Izuku. Why do they need me? Izuku asked, fully serious. Well, they want you for your quirk. Seems like their master wants it for some reason, but other than that, I don't care what they want. I just wish to fight and kill anyone who I come across. They won't mind that you are roughed up or dead upon delivery. Muscular said, gripping the boy's head more. That's enough. Izuku said, flying towards the villain using his energy to seemingly disappear from his spot and kick Muscular in the gut, causing him to drop the boy in his hands. As the boy fell from his hands, Izuku caught him, disappeared from Muscular's view and reappeared next to the second target, Tomoko, and flew towards the forest. As Izuku flew through the forest, he used his quirk in order to protect himself and Kota from any attack that came from all sides as he made his way through the forest. While Izuku was having his battle, the rest of the summer camp was in chaos. All the students were trying to return to camp as well as fight the villains without using their quirks lethally. It wasn't until a few moments before they were near the camp that they were told that their classes could use their quirks to defend themselves. And with that, they all fought harder to defeat any and all villains that they were pitted against. Bakugo and Todoroki were up against an opponent who could regrow his teeth and constantly attack them from afar. Uraraka and Tsuyu fought a girl who had fangs and was the literal incarnation of a vampire. Kendo and Tetsu were fighting the person responsible for sending the gas that knocked everyone out and were taking care of him. Izuku and Vlad King were near the main building fighting a flame-wielding villain and a duplicating villain on their own. All in all, it was major clusterfuck, and they were fighting in order to restore some peace to the training camp. Izuku and Vlad had sent out a distress beacon to the school in order to call for help in the forest as they fought, and were told that the heroes would be there within about an hour. Long enough for the villains to team up on all of their students and kill them before any help arrived, and they were dealing with a duplication villain as well. Uraraka and the villain known as Himiko Toga were fighting, as Uraraka had used her gunhead martial arts to take the villainess down on her own. But she was quickly swapped onto the ground as the girl had taken some of her blood to drink, but it wasn't even more than a couple ounces. Tsuyu had also arrived in time to make sure that the villainess couldn't take even more blood, as with their combined strength as well as tactics they took the villainess down without much trouble. Bakugo and Todoroki had managed to finally put the tooth villain down that they were fighting, until Anoma with chainsaw hands had appeared and started to fight them. With Mizo and Tokoyami, they had been in trouble since Dark Shadow had taken over the boy's mind and had been attacking anything that moved without discrimination. Izuku had crossed paths with them as he was escaping from Muscular as Tokoyami, and Mizo had sent Dark Shadow Air, the S-class villain, with them. Knowing that Izuku was alright, they continued the fight against the villain that he brought over to them and took it as a blessing. Now with Izuku, he had been running through the forest so fast that he completely forgot that he placed his quirk's power all into his lower feet and had himself suspended in the air, flying faster towards the camp's main building. It wouldn't take him much longer than 2 minutes to arrive there with how fast he was flying, and he may have accidentally smacked right into one of the villains that were attacking Mandalay, Pixie Bob, and Tiger, and knocked them out on accident. When Tiger and the other teachers noticed Izuku's condition as well as their friend and nephew in his arms, they released a sigh of relief. Mandalay-san, we need to make sure that I am hidden, Izuku said, as the woman looked at him in disbelief. What are you talking about? The woman asked, as the lizard man looked at Izuku with one glance. He's the one we're heir. He's had quite the experience with this fucked up society, and he will be an excellent member to our cause, the lizard man said, as Izuku moved away from the lizard as he approached. All right, Midoriya, I will inform the rest of the camp about what happens. Just get to the safety of the camp's building. We will hold them. Oh, Mandalay said, as she contacted Izuku and Vlad King about the villain's target. As Izuku took with Tomoko and Kota, he flew as fast as he could before he could run out of stamina, and was running on pure adrenaline in order to get to safety. He was within a few feet of the building when a hand came out of nowhere, intent on clotheslining him. Moving over the hand, he looked and sensed the power of the person who tried to grab him from the air. Landing near the base, he saw that it was a black-haired villain wearing a dark blue trench coat. Well, would you look at that, our target came to us. It seems like Muscular can follow directions, the villain said, as he reached out for Izuku again. Jumping back from the villain, Izuku ran inside the building and placed the people he was transporting there. inside as he ran out to lead the villain away from the building. As he came out, he saw that the villain was about to torch the building and he punched the villain in the face before kicking him in the gut, sending him through multiple trees. Once the trees fell down, two figures appeared behind him as he jumped away from them on edge, only to see it was the teachers of classes 1A and 1B. Problem child. What are you doing here? Izuku asked, incredulously. I was sent here by Mandalay. The villains are after me for some reason. Izuku said, as Izuku nodded his head with Vlad King. Well, keep yourself hidden within the building. Me and Vlad will take care of the villain, do not come out until we say you can. Izuku said, as Izuku nodded his head and entered the building. Grabbing the people inside, he ran towards the remedial classes room and saw Mina, Kirishima, Sato, and Kaminari sitting looking at him in shock. Are you okay, Midoriya? Sato called out, running over to the panting Izuku. The villains are attacking us, Izuku said, as he moved to the corner of the room where the darkness covered him completely. Well, why are you here? Sato asked. The villains are me. I can't leave the building until Izuku sensei says. Izuku retorted as Sato looked at his classmates and they all nodded. We will keep you safe from the villains, just make sure that you are well hidden in here, Mina said, as the small squad had gone back to their seats as Izuku covered himself with the school bags. With Izuku safe and secure, the rest of the class outside and in the camp were fighting against the villains harder now that they heard that Izuku was safe and sound within the summer camp building. It wasn't until later on that the group in the building would notice that the building isn't as safe as they thought it would be. Walking down the hallway of the building was a man who held the power to give and take quirks. He was wearing a mask over his face that resembled a skill, and he walked over towards the remedial classes as he knew that was where his target was located. All he needed to do now is make sure that the children inside got away from his target and leave him all alone with the boy. He. I can't wait to get my hands on that quirk of his, the villain said, as he smirked from underneath his mask. As Izuku and his classmates were hiding in their classroom, they heard distinct footsteps outside the room as Izuku felt the power of the individual from where he was hiding. It was more powerful than the rest of his classmates, as he immediately got up from where he was and moved towards the door and blasted it as soon as the man had gotten right in front of it. And with the burst of power, the person who had been there to get to them was seen careening in the distance as they all looked at him. What the hell, Midoriya? That could have been our teacher, Sato called out, concerned. That wasn't our teacher, Izuku said, breathing heavily. What do you mean? Ashido asked, now even more scared. His power was many times more than Aizawa sensei's, Izuku said, as the others stared at him in fear. Izuku then moved to head away from where his classmates were located as he ran towards the direction of his teacher. He was hoping that the man could erase the man's quirk so that they could all take him down together. This man was extremely old, older than most quirks in the world. And Izuku didn't want to fight that at the man's full power. As soon as he ran into the forest towards his teacher, Izuku heard the Sounds of the man's footsteps coming fast behind himself. As soon as he made it to where his teacher was located, he jumped down next to him, as the man looked at him weirdly. "What are you doing here, Midoriya?" he called out, as he tossed his capture scarf around the boy. A new villain appeared. He has power that is almost as strong as All Might, Izuku said, as his teacher gained a hardened expression. "Get behind me," he said, as Izuku hid behind the teacher. For Izuku Shota, he had never seen Midoriya Izuku as scared as he was right now. He had always seen the boy smiling happily as he helped his classmates, specifically the girls of the class, with whatever they needed help with. And to see all the happiness away from the boy's face meant something scared him so much that he had to come to him in order to protect himself. As soon as they stared out into the forest, they could hear maniacal laughter as the man who was chasing Izuku walked out into the clearing. Izuku Shota, otherwise known as the underground hero Eraserhead. "Your quirk is really good, I could use it against All Might to kill him faster," the masked villain said, as Izuku immediately knew why his student was so fearful. "Don't let him touch you," Izuku said, as the villain stared at Izuku in mock shock. "You've figured out my quirk that easily, my what a brain on this one. I can't wait to see how well you could handle having multiple quirks forced into your body," the villain chuckled. Izuku knew that at the moment, there was no escaping from the area, so he was glad that he sent out a distress beacon earlier that evening so that the school of UA could send heroes to his location as fast as possible. Standing in a fighting stance, he stared at the villain in front of himself. As he spoke up towards the villain, not even fearful of the man. "All for one, to think that I'd actually be able to see you in the flesh. I thought that you were a children's folk tale that the parents talked about," Shota said, as he and Izuku went a different direction as they both circled the villain as he did the same to them. "I am the boogeyman for a reason. I am glad that the people of this generation actually remember a villain such as I. It has been too long since I had found a quirk that was befitting of a villain such as myself, and I can't wait to either turn your student against society or turn him into one of my mindless Nomu," the villain said, laughing. As Izuku erased the villain's quirk, he and Izuku launched towards the villain as they landed multiple strikes against the man's mask, as it seemed to be important. But it seemed like the moss was protected by some kind of armor plating that would need a bit more power to crack as well as break. Both teacher and student fought for their lives, since this villain could do anything to kill them with but a single mistake. Making his way over towards the distress beacon, All Might had made his way as fast as he could. He knew that this kind of attack was something that All for One could set up. Nobody that worked for him couldn't have the knowledge to wait for literal years to come up with this. He was jumping from building to building as he saw the forest in question as he sped up his pace in order to get to where the beacon was located. Behind him many heroes were following behind him, being Endeavor, Mirko, Best Jeanist, Edge Shot, Ryukyu, and more. There were also teachers from UA coming in their direction on buses that were set to head towards the camp where the Pussycats were located. "Just hold on, show," a blonde-haired man said, as he looked worryingly out the window. Izuku and Izuku were sent flying into a tree as they collided with two giant trees behind themselves. Izuku was the first to stand back up, as he stared on in fear as well as determination to stop this man. Izuku got up slowly as he had a concussion from their brawl. He had no idea that the man was this powerful without all his quirks and main quirk. Being given some energy from Izuku, he stood up tall as he got into his fighting stance once more as the villain seemed to get a little annoyed. The simple fact that you both are still standing is something that I got to hand to you, younger generation of heroes. You are certainly like cockroaches who don't know when to go down, the villain said, before noticing a presence in the distance and closing in fast. It seems like my time is almost up. I need to end this quick. Can't let All Might find out that I was here as well, the villain said, before disappearing from Izuku's view. Izuku then noticed how the villain was about to steal his teacher's quirk when his feet moved before he could think, and activating his quirk he flew in the direction of his teacher and pushed the man out of the way. And as soon as the man was pushed out of the way, an explosion had smacked into the back of All for One. The shock wave alone had enough power to send the man launching through multiple trees as both teacher and student looked and found Bakugo standing there with his hands smoking with a smirk on his face. Bakugo, what are you doing here? Izuku called out, as Izuku ran over to help him up. I came here because everyone is inside the building at camp. You both are the only ones who weren't there, Bakugo said, before looking at the person getting up. I never thought you'd be fighting the Quirk Boogeyman. Well, no matter, I will help you both defeat this extra, Katsuki said, as he smiled dangerously at the villain. Katsuki Bakugo, Quirk Explosion. A very versatile quirk, and at the same time perfect for both heroics and villainy. I can't wait to get my hands on a quirk such as that, All for One said, as he walked towards the students and their teacher. Glad to know that I am well known by the villain of villains. Well, Deku, let's teach this old-timer the reason why you don't fuck with us younger generation of heroes, Katsuki screamed out as he launched towards the villain as Izuku followed suit. Izuku watched in awe as both his students flew around the villain as they blasted him with explosions as well as plasma blasts. And Izuku couldn't hold back the chuckle as he kept his vision tunneled on All for One to prevent either Izuku or Bakugo's quirks from being stolen. He could only hope and pray that the three of them could hold the villain until All Might of the other heroes could arrive. And just as he finished with that thought, another presence made itself known as he slammed All for One's head into the ground. Young Bakugo. Young Midoriya, get Izuku out of here and escape. The heroes are here to stop the Quirk Boogeyman, the hero said, as both students stared at the hero in shock and awe as they nodded and ran over to Izuku. It's been a few years since we last met, All Might. You placed me in a wheelchair, and I took away your ability to keep your hero form. Let's see what happens when we meet again, the villain said, as both Titanic people clashed. As Izuku and Bakugo were running through the forest, they had been about to reach the camp when Izuku noticed a presence nearby as he stopped. Sensing the energy, he found out that it was Okako, and she was still running towards the building. Running over to where Okako Was he never noticed how Bakugo had looked at him like he was crazy? Okako had been running from the villainess who was trying to get her blood for about 13 minutes now. She had no idea what happened to her classmates, but she had to keep this woman as far away from the others as possible. Just as she was about to be tackled by the villainess, a fast blur of green had knocked the villainess away as she looked behind herself to find Izuku standing in the air, floating, staring at the villainess. Sent flying. "Izuku! What happened?" she called out, seeing his damaged clothes and body. All for one, the quirk boogeyman had come to the camp. He tried to take mine and Ragdoll's quirk. But as soon as I blasted him away, he came near me until I found Izawa-sensei. But as soon as we fought him for a while, Kaken had arrived and helped us hold him until All Might arrived. We need to go, now. Izuku screamed as he grabbed her hand and flew them both away as fast as possible. As the two flew through the air, Izuku pulled her close to his chest as he held her in a princess carry. As the girl snuggled up to his chest, she kept herself from having lewd thoughts about him as they finally arrived at the camp. "All right everyone. Get on the buses and get to your seats. We are heading back to UA as fast as possible," Vlad King called out. It was here that everyone noticed Izuku and Okako arriving nearby, and they pulled the two onto the buses, and as soon as everyone's gear was inside the bus, both machines took off from the camp at full speed. It wasn't long until multiple helicopters had arrived deep in the forest as they started to broadcast the fight between All For One and All Might. Everyone had their phones out as they witnessed the fight of the century as both fighters went blow for blow in the forest. And it seemed like All Might and All For One were evenly matched until All Might had smashed the man's mask like it was nothing. That was when they all seen the results of the last time the two had fought, and they were happy that the villain couldn't see anymore. This fight had transformed the forest into a wasteland as they both landed punches on the other, enough to make sure that all animals in the area were either dead from the shockwaves or fleeing the area never to return. Within the next few minutes, the buses had arrived at an intersection where Vlad had ordered the bus's AI to take the correct turns to head back to the school. It was here that more buses had arrived and showed the rest of the UA faculty as they helped the buses holding the students and the teachers and pussycats escape from the villains and hero fighting. The fight had been getting worse and worse since the two were going at full power or even more for All Might, and it wasn't much longer before the other heroes had arrived at the scene to help the number one hero. Endeavor sent a blast of heat waves at the villain as the man merely scored at the head before being slammed in the back of the head by Mirko. "Well, if it isn't the boogeyman of quirks. I can't wait to see how strong you are compared to me," the heroine said, smiling maniacally. "Well, that isn't very heroic. No matter, I can just defeat you all," the villain stated before using a shockwave to send all heroes away from him except All Might. It wasn't long before another hero had arrived and caused massive damage internally to the villain as the hero on the scene was Edge Shot, as he formed right next to All Might. "Pro Hero Edge Shot reporting for duty," the man said, entering a combat stance as the villain was surrounded by heroes. As All For One stood back up, he could only describe the feeling that he felt for the first time in his life as All Might's fist was about to make contact with his face. Fear. And as soon as All Might's fist collided with the villain's face, it pushed him down so hard that he created a massive hurricane of gale force winds and was seemingly knocked out. But that wasn't the only thing that the hero did. He knew that this villain would wake up soon, so he had Endeavor come over so that they could end this villain once and for all. Endeavor, come here. All Might called out as the reporters in the helicopters recorded what All Might was about to say. What do you need, All Might? The number 2 hero asked, angrily. As soon as I tear him limb from limb, you must burn his corpse to nothing. He cannot be allowed to live anymore. All Might said, as the reporters had stared at the hero in shock. Everyone around the world who was watching this fight was shocked by how fast and non-hesitant that the number 1 hero was with killing this specific villain. All right, just know that you will be having a PR nightmare ere this is done. Endeavor said, as he prepared his flames. And as soon as All Might gathered the strength to tear the villain apart, he tore the legs and arms of the villain before taking the torso and splitting it apart from the seams of the neck. Now, Endeavor, All Might said, as Endeavor himself had blasted the villain with flames so hot that it turned white as the body was essentially cremated. Everyone watched from around the world as All Might then did something completely out of left field. He deflated on live television as he stared at his hero colleagues as he breathed heavily. What happened, All Might? Some of the heroes in the area ran over asking him. I am fine, just need to rest. That villain was not someone who should have been kept alive. I cannot and will not allow him to continue to live. All Might said, as he sat down on a wooden stump. As soon as every single hero stared at the scene of the number 1 hero having a villain killed on live television, some more heroes had arrived to take the hero away. He couldn't talk to the people at the moment since he was breathing heavily as well as wheezing from the damage he took from the villain. Izuku and the other students on the buses were staring at the hero in shock. He had never killed a villain on live television before. Not only that, but the man was the paragon of second chances. If this villain was so evil, so bad, that he didn't deserve a second chance, then what All Might had done was for the safety of the next generation of heroes. We should probably get some sleep. I don't think I can stay awake much longer, Izuku said, as Okako looked at him as he laid his head on her lap and passed out. Blushing slightly, she rubbed her fingers through his hair as she smiled down at him as he slept soundly. Tsuyu had walked over and sat next to Okako as she also played with the boy's hair as they smiled down at the unconscious boy. Izuku and his classmates woke up in the dorms. They had been moved in since the start of the second semester. He was really thankful for the fact that his mother was in a nursing home for her Alzheimer's disease, that she was slowly losing her memory of him before her mind would completely shut down. But by the time that would happen, Izuku should have been a part of the hero charts as one of the best in the nation. He was walking down the steps into the common room when he overheard some of the other classmates talking about him. What's happening? He asked as he walked into the room. We are talking about the provisional licenses exam that are coming up. We have been wondering about what we will be going up against. Momo said, as she looked at the other girls. The other girls had looked at one another before, nodding their heads as they mutually agreed to not tell the green bean about their private conversation. As Izuku got his breakfast consisting of some morning rice with sugar being mixed in, he sat down next to Okako and Tsuyu as he settled in. The two girls had both rubbed their arms on his as he slowly became red in the face as he tried to further eat his food. He remembered their night of passion as both girls took charge and made him look submissive towards both. As he shook himself out of that memory, he started to chow down on his food as the rest of his class, as they made their way into the room. And then I told the bitch that next time, she better get me a new one. Bakugo laughed as he grabbed Kirishima. I can't believe that you told someone that, Baku bro, that isn't really nice. Kirishima said, as he sighed. I don't care, shitty hair, at least you're more casual than fucking Deku over there. Bakugo said, as he grumbled into getting breakfast. As they made their way to the classroom, Izuku was really nervous if it was coming to the time of the provisional licensing exams. He had always known that he wouldn't make it this far, so to see that he was as close as he was to becoming one of the heroes through this fake licensing exam, it was really a benchmark for himself. Izuku entered the class as he told them that they would be going to the licensing exams in a couple of hours, allowing them to have the time to relax beforehand. The day was kind of really lax compared to other days as he relaxed in the classroom next to Okako and Tsuyu as they made their presence calm his nerves a bit. Are you ready to take the provisional exams? Okako asked, as he looked more nervous about their closeness. I am a little bit nervous. To have always been a nervous person, gained the nerves of my mother, you know, Izuku asked, as the girls nodded their heads. Izuku, you'd worry more about an insect not meeting its family than you would for any person missing work, Tsuyu said, as Izuku chuckled weakly. I don't worry that much about everyone, Izuku retorted as both girls looked at him. You worried more about Bakugo during the raid on the Pussycat's forest than you did for yourself. Do you have no self-preservation? Okako asked, as Izuku pointedly looked away. The class had made their way over to the exams where the provisional licensing will be taking place. Izuku was the first on the bus as he looked at the massive building in front of him and was instantly intimidated by the height of it. Is it just me or is it making me intimidated from how short I am? Izuku questioned as Okako and the others exited the bus. I am intimidated by the height as well, but not as much, Izuku-kun. But don't worry, me and Tsu-chan are here for you, Okako said, whispering the last part into his ear. He blushed crimson before another bus showed up. The bus was from Shiketsu High School as Izuku saw a bunch of second-year students arrive at the area. Following a bald-headed young man who towered over Izuku as if he was a mere ant. Hello, students of UA. I am Ineza Yoarashi. Pleasure to meet you. The young man introduced himself, slamming his head into the ground. Gaah. Please don't hurt yourself like that, Yoarashi-kun. I don't want you to have a C concussion. Izuku fretted over the guy as the man stood back up as Izuku used his quirk to Pull out some bandages to cover the blood up. As Izuku was busy fretting over Yorashi boy, Okako looked at the blonde-haired girl as she asked her a question. Does that Yorashi guy really do that kind of thing to everybody? Okako asked, as the blonde-haired girl nodded. That's Inazukun for you, doesn't matter who the person is. He will slam his head into the ground for a greeting no matter who or what kind of rank in the world you are. Sorry, my name is Utsushimi Kami. Nice to meet you, Utsushimi said, as she smiled at Okako. My name is Urarika Okako, and the one who is fretting over Yorashi-kun like he was their increasingly worried parent is Midoriya Izuku. Sorry about him, he is a really nervous boy when you get to meet him. But he is more worried about others than himself ere you get to know him, Okako said, as Utsushimi nodded. Well, at least you won't be that stupid compared to the previous years that came here, Utsushimi said, as Okako gained a curious expression. What are you talking about? Okako asked, as the girl stared at her in disbelief. Well, far be it from me to ruin the surprise. Have fun getting wrecked, the girl said, as she walked away. As Okako was wondering about why the girl acted that way, she walked over and pulled the still fretting Izuku away before he decided to adopt the Yorashi boy from his own parents. Alright Izuku, we will need a plan in order to escape from the first event of the exam. Do you have a plan? Okako asked, as the rest of Class 1A moved closer. I don't have one yet, but as soon as the events are stated, I will make one as soon as possible, Izuku said, uncharacteristically serious. Once everyone was inside the building, they all waited in a large open area as an extremely tired man entered the booth, looking over all the students. Based on how large the bags under his eyes were, he would be giving Izuku a run for his money on how much sleep he gets. Welcome to the annual provisional licensing exams. My name is Mara, and I will be the announcer for this exam site. For you all to pass and gain a provisional license to use your quirks in the field, you will need to at least get a better score than 120 points on both the written exam as well as the practical. The written exam lasts around 1 hour, so you have that time to revise as well as check your answers for if they are correct or not. For the practical, it will be explained as soon as you have completed the written. Without further ado, go to your selected numbered seats and begin the written exam, Mara said, as he walked away. But as he walked away, Izuku could have sworn that he overheard the man state, I don't get enough sleep for this, as the man walked out of the room to allow the students to focus. About an hour later, Izuku could be seen setting up his paper to be taken away as he stretched his body and heard some pops of his bones. He stood up and walked around to get a drink of water when someone came up behind him and spoke. So you are the infamous Midoriya Izuku, gotta say, you do not live up to the hype of your name and power, the man said, and as Izuku looked behind himself, he saw a young man in the Shiketsu garb as he stared at him angrily. You who are you? Izuku asked, as the young man looked angered even more. My name is Seiji, and in this battle for the provisional licensing exams, it will be Shiketsu who will win over all of you, Seiji said, as Izuku looked at him confused. What are you talking about? Shouldn't we all work together to become heroes? Izuku asked, as the young man stared at him in disbelief. It is the school's priority to send out the best of heroes, and you are worried about working together. He called out furiously. I am sorry if I am upsetting you. I just think that if we are fighting each other, isn't that giving villains more time to, you know, mobilize? Izuku asked, looking at the young man. You do have a point, I will give you that. But that doesn't mean that the schools don't battle here for becoming heroes. Be prepared to lose, CG said, before walking away. I wonder what happened to him in order to make UA become his scapegoats for being in danger all the time. Izuku mumbled to himself before walking back to his class. As soon as Izuku re-entered the area where he and his class were going to be standing at, he knew that something was wrong with their area. It was placed in the arena where they could be surrounded on all sides and taken advantage of for their placement. He and his classmates were placed in a small divot where they would have to climb out of there in order to escape and eliminate 100 people in order to move on to the next part of the exams. He was placed in the far back since no one knows much about his quirk, not even the people who make this exam. All they know is that it is an energy stockpiler that allows him to do anything that characters from Dragon Ball Z do without much effort. As Izuku subtlety charges his energy in order to protect his class, that was when the other schools had surrounded them as Izuku discreetly placed a barrier around them as the other schools monologued. It was here that when he made a move to run in a different direction that they all attacked with the intent to disqualify all of Class 1A from the provisional exams. But they weren't ready for a barrier to be placed in front of the class and have their balls bounce away as if there was a wall protecting them. Split up and run. Find groups of 3 or 4 and keep each other safe, Izuku called out, as everyone split up. Izuku ran towards the city so that he could use the urban environment to his advantage and hide until time gives up. He knows that he doesn't have any moves that would allow him to defeat anyone at the moment without risking lethality. So as he was running, he got ambushed by some students and managed to fly around them as he used their throwing against them and used the wind to push the balls right in the correct position to hit them on their targets. Alright, that is 9 out of 100. Targets hit. As soon as I hit 100, I will be able to move on to the next round, Izuku thought to himself as he moved further into the distance. Little did he know that someone was watching him very closely from afar. Ah, little Izuku is moving faster than I can keep up with. No matter, I will make sure that he can bleed, the blonde-haired girl said, as she smiled sadistically as the green cinnamon roll was running towards the city. Izuku was making runs throughout the whole city as he was making sure to take out opponents left and right from different schools. He had been able to amass enough points in order to pass on to the second part of the exam and would soon be on his way, but he wanted to eliminate around 100 people like that Shiketsu student from earlier in the event. He was sitting around 65 eliminations under his belt as he was traversing the entire arena as he was trying to get enough points to pass. He made it to a ruins zone of the arena as he was clearing the area of enemy students from other schools. It kind of made him happy that they weren't taking him seriously since he was all on his own and they were attempting to make sure that he didn't get allies coming to save him. All that ended up for them was them getting their asses handed to them by a boy who was extremely nervous as well as had a lot of power. Being packed behind a punch to their faces. Izuku was running around a bit more as he was deciding to move on to a new area in order to get some more eliminations when he heard movement behind him. And as he turned around to see who was there, he noticed that one of his buzzers had shown a bright red as he jumped away from the spot he originated from. Looking around the area, he found that Eureka was there as well as he ran over to her and hid next to her. As they were both looking at the battlefield between rival schools, he was muttering about a plan to take both of them out, as Eureka had slowly but surely tried to attack him with a ball of her own. But as soon as she was about to touch one of his targets, he immediately turned on her and placed her back to the ground as he stared at her. "What are you doing here, Himiko Toga?" Izuku glared at the girl as she started to melt. Okako was running everywhere in order to find Izuku. The poor boy had gone on his own in order to try his own hand at passing the exam on his own, and she couldn't find him anywhere. She heard some fighting in the ruins area of the provisional exam area, and as soon as she got near the spot where she was about to reach the fighting, she found Izuku holding down herself. "Hey Izuku, what are you doing to her?" Okako asked as she ran over. Izuku had looked up at her and told her the situation, and she was on immediate alert as she went over to Izuku, and they both looked over to where their teachers would probably be watching the event from. Izuku placed his hands in the air, giving an S.O.S kind of hand movements as he was trying to get the proctors to come out and stop the provisional exams. But when they all received none, the duo faced against Himiko Toga of the League of Villains as they glared at one another. "Izuku, I can't wait to make you bleed," Himiko called out as she smiled at both Izuku and Okako. "Toga, what in the hell are you doing here?" Izuku demanded as he stood next to Okako as he activated his quirk. "Well, since the bossman was killed by Endeavor as well as All Might, the Liao was put into different areas of the country as we tried to attempt to live on our own," Himiko said, as she slowly closed the distance. Izuku kept his guard up as he kept his quirk activated and projected his ki onto her in order to make sure that she doesn't catch them off guard and nearly kill them with a knife. As Himiko was about to attack Okako, Izuku kicked her in the back, sending her to the ground as he glared hard at the girl in question. "What are you doing attacking me? I just want to get some blood," she said, as she pouted. "If blood is all you need, can't you go to a blood bank in order to get it?" Okako asked, as she entered the conversation. "Why would anyone want to give me blood? They all just look at me like I'm some sort of monster," Himiko said, as she got up from the ground. "That kick really hurt. I can't believe that Izuku would stop me from making Okako-chan bleed," Himiko thought to herself, as she prepared for another attack. This time she would go for Izuku's front, but he was right there in front of her as he kicked the blade out of her hand as she became shocked at how he knew where she was again. "I might not be capable of seeing where you are when you erase your presence, but I can sense your energy. It's not that hard," Izuku said, as he placed the girl in a full Nelson and then held her to the ground. Pulling out his phone, he went to call his teacher, when he remembered something. His phone was not in his pocket as they took it out before the provisional license exam. Cursing inside his head, he grabbed Himiko and tossed her to Okako as the girl went to do a roundhouse kick to the girl's noggin, only to be stopping herself halfway as Himiko had pulled out yet another knife and nearly plunged the knife into her leg. Okako only escaped from that exchange with a small nick to her leg. As she moved back to Izuku as just before Himiko was about to attack. The exam was called as everyone who was remaining in the exams were safe to move on so long as they weren't eliminated. This isn't over. Toga. You better get out of here before the heroes notice your presence. Izuku said, as the girl turned into the Shiketsu girl once again. As she ran falling to his knees, Izuku had started to breathe heavily as him using his key quirk was really causing him problems. Had he continued in that fight to prevent Himiko from taking their blood, she probably would have been able to kill them both. Moving on to the second portion of the exam, Izuku and Okako had moved together in order to figure out what to do for the second portion. Shaking his head, they waited for the proctors to call the exam when the ground rumbled, causing everyone to start stumbling over one another. Izuku, being so close to Okako, had his face landed in her bountiful chest as they fell to the ground as Izuku became a blushing mess at their situation. I am sorry. Izuku called out as he stood up immediately. As soon as they were back up, they looked at the devastated cityscape for the exams as they were told to save as many civilians as possible in order to pass the exams. Moving out into the city, Izuku and Okako stayed near one another as they teamed up with certain students from other schools as they cleared as much civilians from danger as possible. Izuku got a few points docked for seeming to be not present at the moment as he was currently looking in every direction to see if Toga would attack again. He might not trust villains, but something was about that girl whenever he met her on the battlefield. He did this many times looking for any villains in the area since Himiko was here. That meant that some of the other members of the league might be there as well. It was here that some of the civilians who volunteered for the event noticed that Izuku was more on edge than the other students as one decided to ask him what was wrong. "Hey young man, what the hell got you so on edge for?" one of the civilian targets asked. "A villain was fighting me and Okako in the last event. I'm trying to make sure that there aren't any other villains in the area to keep you all safe," Izuku said, as he kept looking around the area. But as soon as they got there, civilians to the safe zone, a massive explosion happened, and the air cooled down a lot when Izuku saw a plume of smoke in the air. "Is that supposed to be a part of the exam?" Izuku asked, as the civilians nodded their head. Sighing in relief, Izuku and Okako took them all to the safe zone so that they could be healed of their injuries as the civilians went to tell the proctors about what Izuku told them. Izuku would make his way towards where the explosions and heated and cooled air was coming from. He just hoped that it wasn't the League of Villains who were present here. He didn't think that the entire league would attack such a place that multiple schools of children would be located at. If they were, he seriously hoped that they could escape without being taken down without the help of pro heroes. Where the explosion had taken place earlier, a large, mutated man was standing near two students of UA and Shiketsu high schools, respectively. It was Shoto Todoroki and Ineza Yoarashi who were staring down at the current number 9 hero of Japan. Gang Orca as he glared at both students with a smirk on his face. Ah, it seems that there are some hero wannabes who are trying to foil my plans. Let's change that. Shall we? Gang Orca said, before releasing a massive explosion of sonar screams at the two. At the exact same time of the sonar attack, Shoto had released his ice in order to try and counteract the attack only to empower it completely. The trio were battling it out as the two students were really getting under the skin of the other with gusto. Gang Orca was having some boring thoughts about how those two weren't as strong as he hoped if they weren't going to work together. Just as he was about to attack again, he felt a presence making its way over to him. Based on a sixth sense, and he smirked. Ah, the true final boss of this event is making his way here. Based on power alone, he could take on Ryukyu in her dragon form with slight problems, but could come out on top if it weren't for her inherent ability to make sure that she could hide her own energy. Gang Orca thought to himself before pressing on. The two students from rival schools would continue to screw up the attacks of the others and blame it on each other as if they were schoolyard children. Sighing in exasperation, he released a more massive scale scream of sonar that caused both children to fall to the ground in pain as they held their heads. He continued to walk towards them as he monologued about how they just can't seem to work together in order to defeat him, and that it would be impossible if they continued to fight. Any moment now, and the real threat would arrive. I give it about 30 seconds tops. Gang Orca thought again as the two students combined their powers in his complete disrespect of not paying attention to them. As they superheated the air around him to dry him out, he was surprised that they worked together to use the wind already moving about to try and dry him out as he basically destroyed their attack as he watched them writhe on the ground in pain, incapable of moving anymore. That was a good move. Had you used it a few minutes before, I would have been in trouble of dehydration. But I believe that our time is now up. I will be defeating you both in order to deal with the incoming threat to this battle, Gang Orca said, as he was about to finish both students when a massive ball of energy smacked right into him as he was sent flying into the other direction, crashing into the wall next to where he broke into the arena. Shoto and Ineza looked to the sky where the attack came from and were shocked to find Izuku floating in the sky, breathing heavily. Ha! Ha! How's that one for you? Izuku panted as he landed on the ground, giving both boys some energy in order to get them up. Thanks, Midoriya, but we need to focus on the threat now, Shoto said, as Ineza stood next to the panting boy. Why would you waste your energy on us? We're just going to get in the way, Ineza asked, as Izuku regained his breathing. I know that you both could defeat him, you just needed a distraction in order to learn how to take him on without my presence. Also, the civilians are about 98% evacuated, Izuku said, as Gang Orca had exited his prison of rocks. Geez, if I ever piss you, oh young man, make sure that I can take the blast at point blank. Gang Orca called out, as everyone got into a fighting stance. Walking out of the rubble with minor damage, Gang Orca looked around himself before stretching his arms and legs, causing pops to come from his bones underneath the skin. As soon as he stretched himself out, he pulled a water bottle out as he rejuvenated himself as he walked over to the children. I got to say, coming in at the nick of time was a good thing for them. But this is where it's over. Gang Orca said, preparing a massive attack when the buzzers of the event called out. All students within the arena are to report outside of the arena. All civilians have been evacuated. I repeat, all students from each remaining schools are to be taken outside of the arena. The proctors called out, as Izuku collapsed onto the ground. Ere the event of the provisional licensing exams, Class 1A had moved onto the dorms as they prepared for everything to continue on like normal. Their next class would have an appearance from the Big Three, from what their teacher informed them about, and they would be fighting one of them in order to see how tough the work studies would be when they joined the ranks. Izuku was sitting in his room looking at his provisional license as he smiled down at it, his very own hero license. Although it wasn't a true hero license, he knew that it was just one step away now. The next day came quicker than Izuku expected it would, as he entered his classroom as the teacher was already sleeping behind his desk at the moment. Izuku couldn't help but smile at how the man, no matter what situation he was in, could easily find a spot to just sleep for a small while before getting right down to business. Once all the students were inside the classroom, they found out about how they were going to be given work studies partners in hero agencies around the entirety of Japan. Izuku looked at the paper he was given and found that his work studies hero he was going to work under was Sir Nitai, the sidekick to All Might himself. For a few years before they parted ways because of an argument between the two that happened behind closed doors. As Izuku looked at the paper, he knew that the hero could become a boon for him, since the man would help him predict his opponent's strikes as well as attacks, so he could be sure to prevent any unneeded damage dealt to himself. He had increased the power of his attacks as well, he just needed to have the right teacher in order to teach him how to predict his opponent's moves. Sir Nitai was one of the heroes to look out for, since the man could see your future just with a single touch of the body. Izuku couldn't wait for dash. Hello Class 1A, meet me down in the school gym so we can have our fight. A blonde-haired boy called out, stealing Izuku's attention to the fact he completely forgot about how the Big Three of the school were giving them a visit, as well as going to be fighting one of them. As the class arrived in the gym where they were against their senpais of the school, the blonde one walked up into the front of his trio as he smiled. All right, so in order to best show you how hard it will be in the work studies, you will all fight against me, the boy said, as Izuku moved up. Sir, what's your name? Izuku asked, as the young man looked over. Ah. So you're the one Sir was wishing to join his agency. My name is Mirio Togata, and my hero name is Lemillion. The boy introduced himself. Izuku nodded and returned to his spot within his class, and as Mirio started to talk about what the hero work studies would entail, Izuku was making a plan in order to take the boy on. From what he remembered from the previous sports festivals in previous years, Mirio Togata had been one of the favorite ones to win them. And he had his quirk that allowed him to permeate through the world as well as those who attacked him. And Izuku had wrote about the boy's quirk in his notebooks in order to gain some knowledge about him in the past. As soon as Mirio looked at the class air informing them about what they were required to do, he only found Izuku muttering to himself as if He was thinking about a plan as he smiled. It was so much fun to toss around the younger generation of heroes and show them not to get too in over their heads and develop a massive ego. That was what led to many of his younger years to die early on in their careers as hero students. As soon as he went into the ground, he disappeared from sight. As Izuku finished up with his plan, he had to predict where the boy would come out next. And why was he alone looking around? He found that he was the last one standing in his group, as Mirio looked at him, kind of amused as well as confused. He went for the attack once again, and as Izuku focused his power on sensing his opponent, he found that the boy had gone underground as he phased through the earth. Izuku looked down to see a spot of hair coming up from the ground as Izuku pointed his fist out to where the boy would come out. Everything moved in slow motion as he did this, and as soon as the blonde tube of hair merely grazed his fingers, the boy's expression became concerned as his senpai felt himself get smacked in the top of his head. As this forced him back underground, the boy decided to move faster than he thought Izuku could predict, and as he was correct on that portion, Izuku had still been able to see him come out of the ground. Although the boy's attack this time was more on the lines of a grazing blow, as Mirio landed a punch to the boy's stomach. The attack sent Izuku skidding backwards as Mirio looked at the small scratch on his cheek as he smiled to himself. Wow, nobody's ever been able to hit me in the last couple of months. Let's see how you fare against my power-up, Mirio said, getting ready to move. Izuku gave a look of concern when the boy erupted up in yellow electricity and moved faster than Izuku could even see, and as soon as he could sense a blow coming up from behind, it was already too late. Izuku placed his LE hand in the way at the last second as a punch landed on his palm, and as his hand moved to his lower back, the boy was sent flying away from the spot he was located at. Mirio looked kind of worried as he saw Izuku bounce across the ground, as he soon was stopped by a tree that was unfortunately nearby. And with a loud thunk, Izuku broke through the tree and was buried within the branches that fell on top of him. How many times have I told you, Togata, not to go too hard on my students? Izuku asked, slightly angry. Sorry sensei, just wanted to see how he would fare against my upgraded quirk, Mirio said, as suddenly there was a mass of wind coming up behind Mirio as the young man felt a presence behind himself. As everything moved in slow motion once again, Mirio had, with the help of his quirk, turned around in just the right moment to see Izuku, bloody and beaten, about to land a punch on his face with a white aura surrounding himself. As soon as the punch had actually landed on his face, this time it was Mirio's turn to go flying into the distance as he bounced across the field. When Izuku looked in awe at Izuku as the boy stood there with his fist pointed out at Mirio's last known position, he smirked to himself. But it was right then and there that Izuku had passed out from taking too much damage from Mirio's attack as he collapsed on the ground in slight pain. I swear to God, you better not have anything to do with why my problem child had gotten a quirk so suddenly, Yagi, Izuku muttered to himself before walking over to Izuku's collapsed form and walking away with it. Izuku woke up in the infirmary as he felt his body protesting to him. Getting up from the bed, he looked around the room and found Recovery Girl standing next to his bed with a slightly angered look on her face. Do you have any idea why you are in my infirmary again, Midoriya Izuku? The woman asked, as Izuku's face became fearful. No, I am sorry if I did anything wrong, Izuku said, stuttering as the old woman sighed. I apologize if I sounded like I was going to hurt you. But you need to be careful about your quirk, Midoriya. Just because you manifested it during the sports festival doesn't mean that you can use it all the time. You need to learn how to control yourself as well as control the power you wield, Recovery Girl said, as Izuku nodded to himself as she smiled at him. Take a few gummies, and Togata will be fine, young man. He is just waiting outside for you, the old woman said, as Izuku smiled. Thank you for helping me out, Recovery Girl, Izuku said, as the old woman chased him out of her voice. Hey there, Kawhi. I'm here to inform you about what Sir wanted me to ask you about, Mirio said, as he smiled. I'm sorry if I hurt you too bad, Mirio-senpai. I'm still trying to get full control over my quirk, Izuku said, as Mirio laughed at oh. It's fine, don't worry about it. That's the first time anyone's hit me as hard as that before. Mirio chuckled as Izuku rubbed the back of his head. Well, did you get the work studies form you needed to have done? Mirio asked, as Izuku nodded and showed it to the boy. Well, I'll be, sir. Sent you one himself. I can't wait to work with you in the future, Kawhi, Mirio said, as Izuku laughed to himself as he the taller man. As Izuku walked back to the dorms, he found Okako and Tsuyu standing there, waiting for him to get there, as he found both taller girls smiling down at him. Hey there, Izuku, how was your talk with Senpai? Okako asked, as Izuku talked about how Sir Nitai had wanted to teach him a few things. Izuku also went on a tangent about how the man used to be All Might's second sidekick he ever had, and how the man's quirk could predict the future of said person. It was how he became such a great hero himself anyway, but it was amazing on how the man only fought quirkless because his quirk couldn't predict the future every day, and he fought whilst predicting his opponent's moves. He treated every villain fight he was in as a game of chess. He made certain moves and managed to pull a win because he used his mind in order to defeat his opponent. As the day came to a close, the girls had stayed in Okako's room, because the said girl had been holding Izuku close to herself. One day, were in Okako's bed. Okako had one side of the boy covered, and the other side was covered by Tsuyu, and they had him in the middle getting the most warmth from their bodies as he snuggled closer to Okako. Instinctively, it was a few days later that Izuku found himself in front of the Nitai agency as he entered the building in search of the pro hero he was supposed to be the ward of. As he walked to the front desk of the place, the person who showed up first was Bubble Girl, as she smiled at him as he walked up to her. What's up, little guy, how can I help you? She asked kindly. I am here to see Sir Nitai, Izuku said, as the woman looked at him. Aren't you a little young to be seeing a hero? She asked, as Izuku sighed. Pulling out his card, he showed the woman his UA pass card as well as his identification so that she wouldn't try and say it was forged. Sorry about that. Just look so small compared to most of us, you know, Bubble Girl said, as she led the way to his voice. Don't worry, it's fine, I've never been really tall. I got it from my mother, she is relatively short compared to my dad. Also, my height is around 4 feet 11 inches, so I can only hope that at some point I can get a little taller. Izuku said, pouting. Don't worry, with all this training you are getting from UA, you might as well get a growth spurt soon enough. Alright, he's on the other side of this door, and be sure to try and give a joke. He is a man who prioritizes jokes over anything other than his serious demeanor. Bubble girl said, as she walked away. As soon as Izuku had knocked on the door, Sir Nitai had told him to enter, and as soon as he walked in, he was greeted with the sight of Mandalay of the Pussycats being tickled on his tickle machine that had feathers that would tickle certain spots of the woman's skin that caused her to laugh hysterically. Mandalay. What happened? Izuku called out, running to the woman as Nitai had taken her the machine. She told a horrible joke, and that was her punishment. Nitai said, seriously, as Izuku looked at the man. Don't worry about me, Midoriya, just focus on your work studies. That's what UA has you on now, right? Mandalay asked, as Izuku nodded. Good, now you can leave him to me, Mandalay. I have some things I need to inform him about. Nitai said, as Izuku looked at the retreating form of Mandalay as she walked out the door. As the man sat down at his desk, he looked at Izuku with a look of pure unseeingly hatred that Izuku was slightly worried for his mental health. So, what do Izuku began to speak before he was grabbed and placed in the tickle machine as the feathers started to tickle his body. What is happening to me? Izuku said, as his body involuntarily laughed. You failed to make a joke, this is your punishment. Sir Nitai said, as he smiled evilly at Izuku. Until you can make a joke that isn't bad, you will stay like that until you either can't laugh no more, or until you aren't ticklish. Sir Nitai said, as he got up from his table and left the room. As he left, all those outsides could hear was the whining boy who couldn't stop laughing for the rest of the day.